It was 3 in the morning when someone started pounding on my door. The sound was so sudden and desperate that I jumped out of bed, heart racing. When I looked through the peephole, my neighbor, Renee, was standing there barefoot, her face pale, blood running down her arm. She whispered, "Hide. Don't open for anyone, not even police." Then she turned and ran down the hallway before I could even ask what happened. I stood frozen, staring at the door, wondering if I'd just dreamed the whole thing. But then, only minutes later, there was another knock, slow, steady, and louder than before. A man's voice called out, "Portland Police Department, open the door." My hands shook as I backed away. I didn't know who was outside or what was happening, but I knew one thing. Renee had told me not to open it. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. You won't believe what happened next. My name is Nora Hayes. I'm 29, and I live alone in a small apartment on the quiet side of Portland. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so I work from home most days, drinking too much coffee and listening to music to keep myself awake during late-night projects. My life isn't exciting, but it's safe, predictable, and peaceful. At least it used to be. I moved into this apartment 2 years ago after a long breakup. I liked the neighborhood because it was quiet, filled with small families and older residents who mostly kept to themselves. The only person I spoke to regularly was my neighbor, Renee Alvarez. She lived 2 doors down and worked long night shifts at the hospital. She was one of those people who seemed gentle and private, always smiling, but never sharing much about herself. We'd exchange a few words in the hallway, sometimes talk about her cat, Luna, or complain about the building's slow elevator. She felt like the kind of neighbor you could trust, someone safe to borrow sugar from, or watch your mail when you're out of town. That Friday night had been uneventful. It was raining outside, and I had stayed up late working on a logo for a client. My apartment smelled like coffee and paint markers. I was wearing my old sweatshirt, half listening to music through my headphones when the first knock came. It was loud, sharp, and unexpected. At first, I thought it might be the wind rattling something outside, but then came another knock, harder, faster. I paused the music, took off my headphones, and listened. There was movement outside my door. I hesitated, wondering if I should call out. Then I heard my name. "Nora, please, it's me. Open the door." It was Renee's voice, but it sounded panicked, strained, like she was out of breath. I rushed to the door and looked through the peephole. What I saw didn't make sense. She was barefoot, her hair tangled, one side of her shirt soaked with blood. She kept looking over her shoulder, as if someone was following her. I unlocked the door halfway before something inside me screamed not to. Instead, I spoke through the door. "Renee, what happened? Do you need help?" Her eyes locked on mine through the peephole. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Hide. Don't open for anyone, not even police. Please, promise me." Then she turned and ran. I heard her footsteps fading down the hallway, then nothing but the sound of rain outside. I stood there frozen, not sure what to do. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I ran to my window and pulled back the curtain, hoping to see where she went. But the parking lot was empty. The streetlight flickered against the wet pavement, and the whole building seemed too quiet. I tried to think logically. Maybe she'd been attacked and was running for help. Maybe she was scared and confused. I picked up my phone to call 911, but my hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped it. Before I could dial, there was another knock, slow this time, deliberate. "Portland Police Department. Ma'am, open up. We just need to ask a few questions." I froze again. My door had no chain, just a single deadbolt. I looked through the peephole, but all I could see were shadows. No uniform, no badge, no flashing lights outside. Something felt off. How could the police have arrived so fast? I hadn't even called them yet. My instincts told me to stay quiet. I backed away from the door and turned off the lights. My apartment went dark except for the faint glow from my laptop screen. The knocking continued, steady and calm, as if whoever was outside had all the time in the world. "Ma'am, we're with the police. We just need to make sure you're safe." My throat felt dry. I wanted to believe them, but Renee's voice echoed in my head. "Don't open for anyone, not even police. so I didn't. I took a step back, holding my phone close, and whispered to myself, something isn't right. That's when I realized the sound outside the door wasn't just one person. There were footsteps, more than one, and I knew, deep down, that whatever was happening, it was far from over. The next few seconds felt longer than anything I had ever experienced. I stood frozen in the dark, clutching my phone and staring at the door as the knocking continued. Whoever was outside was patient. Too patient. They didn't sound urgent, like police usually would during an emergency. Their voice was steady, calm, almost rehearsed. "Ma'am, this is the police. We received a call from your neighbor about a disturbance. Please open the door." My body went cold. Renee had just told me not to open for anyone, not even police. And now someone outside claimed that my neighbor had called them? That didn't make sense. I hadn't even had time to dial 911 myself, so how would they know anything yet? I took another step back and pressed my phone to my ear. I called 911. The dispatcher answered almost immediately, her voice calm and professional. 911. "What's your emergency?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Someone's knocking on my door, claiming to be police. My neighbor came here bleeding and told me not to open for anyone. She ran off, and now these people are here." The dispatcher asked for my address, and I gave it as quietly as I could. There was a short pause before she said something that made my stomach drop. "Ma'am, we don't have any officers dispatched to your address right now. Stay inside and keep your door locked. Real officers are on their way." My heart started pounding so loudly I could barely hear her. I whispered, "Then who's outside my door?" "Do not engage. Stay quiet," she said firmly. "Lock yourself in a safe room if possible. Help is coming." I hung up and slowly backed into my bedroom, every nerve in my body on edge. The knocking stopped suddenly, and for a few seconds, everything was silent. Then I heard footsteps, heavy boots moving down the hallway. I could tell there was more than one person out there. The floor creaked, and I heard a man whisper, "Try the next door." That's when I realized it wasn't just random noise. They were checking apartments, one by one. I crawled to the window and looked out. The parking lot was dimly lit, but in the corner near the dumpster, a dark van sat idling. Its headlights were off, and the engine made a low hum that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't make out a license plate. I saw a man step out wearing dark clothes and a cap. He looked up at my building like he was counting the windows. I ducked down instantly, heart hammering in my chest. Everything felt unreal. Was this a robbery? A setup? Or was Renee running from these same people? I pressed my phone to my chest and prayed the real police would arrive soon. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, making me jump. I looked at the screen. An unknown number. My first thought was that it might be Renee, so I answered without thinking. "Hello." A whisper came through, shaky but familiar. "Nora, it's me. Don't make a sound. They're not cops. They followed me. I'm trying to get to the police now. Stay quiet and keep the lights off." "Renee, what's happening?" I whispered. She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, running, maybe. Then she said, "They know I saw something I shouldn't have. They'll try to trick you. Just don't open that door." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, hands trembling. I wanted to believe I'd misheard her, that this was some misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something terrible was happening. The sound of metal scraping came from my living room. Someone was at my door again, this time trying to force it open. My whole body froze. I backed into the closet, pulling the door almost shut, trying not to make a sound. The apartment was silent, except for the faint tapping of tools against the lock. Then a male voice muttered, "She's in here." I saw the light move. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hand over my mouth and prayed that the real police would get there before they did. For what felt like forever, I listened as they worked on the lock. My heart beat so loudly I was afraid they could hear it. Then, suddenly, the noise stopped. I waited, terrified to even breathe. A second later, the doorknob rattled again, once, twice, and then silence. I could hear one of them speaking quietly outside the door. "Forget it. She's calling for help. Let's move." Their footsteps faded down the hallway. I didn't move for several minutes. My body felt like stone, but my mind was racing. I wanted to peek through the blinds, but I was too afraid of being seen. I thought of Renee again, her pale face, the blood, the fear in her eyes. What could she have possibly gotten herself into? Then, out of nowhere, there was shouting outside the building. Tires screeched. Someone yelled, "Stop!" I crawled toward the window and carefully lifted the curtain just enough to see flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The real police had arrived. 2 officers ran toward the van, guns drawn. One of the men from before bolted out from behind it and sprinted into the woods. I saw another being tackled to the ground. My heart surged with relief and disbelief all at once. For a long moment, I stayed frozen, staring at the chaos outside. I didn't know if Renee was safe or if she had been caught up in something even bigger than this. But I knew one thing for sure. If I had opened that door, I might not be here to tell this story. The pounding on my door had stopped, but my heart was still racing, reminding me how close danger had been, just inches away. I stayed crouched on the floor by the window for a few more minutes, watching the flashing lights outside. The officers moved fast, shouting commands I couldn't quite hear through the glass. Rain had started again, light but steady, making the street glisten under the blue and red reflections. I should have felt safe now, but my body refused to relax. My hands were still shaking, and every sound made my heart jump. What if the men who ran off were still nearby? What if one of them came back? I slowly stood up, still clutching my phone. I needed to know if Renee was safe. I tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. That silence felt worse than the knocking on my door. I turned on the lamp beside my couch, just for a little light, and caught sight of the damage near my door. The lock was scratched and bent, like someone had tried hard to force it open. I touched the metal and felt the grooves under my fingertips. They had been seconds away from getting in. A knock came again, but this time it was different, firm, steady, and accompanied by a voice that sounded official. Portland Police Department. "Ma'am, you can open up. It's safe now." I hesitated. After what just happened, I didn't trust anyone's voice. My throat tightened as I called back through the door. "Show me your badge through the peephole." The officer did exactly that. The gold badge gleamed in the hallway light, and my body finally let out a small breath. I unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see 2 officers standing there, one man and one woman, both soaked from the rain. The male officer introduced himself. "I'm Officer Grant. We've secured the scene outside. Can we come in for a quick statement?" I nodded and stepped aside. The woman, Officer Kim, gave me a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing staying inside," she said. "Those men weren't police. They were impersonating officers to break into apartments." I felt my knees weaken and had to sit down. "They tried my door," I said quietly. "They would have gotten in if the real police hadn't shown up." Officer Grant pulled out a small notebook. "We caught one of them. The other ran into the woods, but we're setting up a search perimeter. Do you know a woman named Renee Alvarez? The suspect mentioned her name before we brought him in." The mention of Renee made my heart sink. "Yes, she's my neighbor. She came to my door earlier. She was bleeding. She told me to hide and not to open for anyone. Then she ran." Both officers exchanged a quick look. "That makes sense now," Grant said. "Your neighbor's been working with us on a case. She's a nurse, right?" "Yes," I said. "She works at the hospital downtown." Officer Kim nodded. "She reported something suspicious connected to 2 paramedics. We believe those men outside tonight are the same ones she warned us about." I sat there speechless. "So she was right. They were after her." Grant nodded. "They must have followed her from work. When she came to you, they probably saw her enter the building. They pretended to be police, hoping someone would open up." The realization made my stomach twist. If I had opened that door, I couldn't finish the sentence. Officer Kim placed a gentle hand on the back of the chair. "You didn't. That's what matters." I nodded weakly. My apartment suddenly felt too small, the air heavy. "Do you know where she is? Renee?" "She called in about 15 minutes before we arrived," Grant said. "She was on foot trying to get to the nearest precinct. We're sending someone to pick her up. She's shaken but alive." Relief washed through me so strongly that I almost cried. For the first time that night, I let myself take a deep breath. "Thank God," I whispered. Grant asked me to describe what I'd heard and seen, and I went through everything. The fake voices, the van, the sound of tools at my door. When I finished, he closed his notebook and said, "You might have saved her life by not opening that door." When the officers finally left, they promised to have patrol cars watch the building through the night. I locked the door behind them, double-checking it twice, then sank onto the couch. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving me exhausted and shaky. I stared at the window, where the police lights still flickered in the distance, and thought about how fast everything had changed. Just hours ago, I had been working on designs, worrying about a deadline. Now I was thinking about what it means to survive. A soft buzz broke the silence. My phone lit up with a text. It was Renee. "I'm safe. They caught one of them. Thank you for listening." Tears filled my eyes as I typed back, "I'm just glad you're alive." I sat there for a while, reading her message over and over. The apartment felt quieter than ever, but not in a peaceful way. The kind of quiet that makes you think about how fragile safety really is. I stood and went to the door one last time, checking the lock again. The metal was still bent from where the men had tried to break in, but it held. That simple lock, that one act of hesitation, had been the barrier between me and something unthinkable. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window until the sun came up, watching the rain ease and the light slowly return to the street. The world looked calm again, but I knew it wasn't the same. I had learned something powerful, the difference between fear and instinct. Fear makes you freeze, but instinct tells you when to move, when to stay still, when to listen. And that instinct had just saved my life. The next morning, the world outside looked washed clean by the rain, but inside me, everything still felt unsettled. I hadn't slept at all. Every creak in the building sounded suspicious. Every shadow made me jump. My phone buzzed again around 9 a.m. It was an unknown number, but something told me to answer. When I did, I heard a familiar voice on the other end. "Nora, it's Detective Miller, Portland PD. I'm working with Officer Grant. We have your neighbor, Renee Alvarez, here at the station. She's safe, but she asked for you." My heart raced. "Is she hurt?" "She's got a few cuts and bruises, but she's stable. She wanted to thank you in person. If you're up for it, we'd like you to come down and talk with us." I agreed right away. My body was tired, but my mind was wired, still replaying the sound of those fake officers outside my door. I got dressed, grabbed my coat, and headed out. The police station was only 15 minutes away, but the drive felt longer. Every car that followed too closely made me grip the wheel tighter. When I finally pulled into the lot, I sat there for a moment, gathering the courage to step out. Inside, the fluorescent lights were too bright, and everything smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning supplies. A young officer escorted me to a small room where Renee sat with a blanket draped around her shoulders. When she saw me, her eyes welled up. She stood, and before either of us could say a word, we hugged tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't listened to me, you wouldn't be here right now." I pulled back and shook my head. "You're the one who warned me. You saved both of us." Detective Miller cleared his throat gently, then said, "Why don't we all sit down? We have a lot to talk about." We sat at a small table, and the detective opened a folder filled with photographs and reports. He looked serious, but calm. "Ms. Hayes, what you witnessed last night ties into an ongoing investigation. The men who came to your building weren't random criminals. They were part of a small group posing as paramedics and police officers to gain access to homes. They targeted vulnerable or isolated people. Renee was the first one to connect their activities to the hospital." I frowned. "The hospital?" Renee nodded. "I started noticing inconsistencies in patient files, people who came in for minor injuries but disappeared from the system. At first, I thought it was a record error. Then I saw one of those men in the hospital parking lot, talking to someone from the cleaning crew. When I reported it to my supervisor, things got strange. My car tires were slashed one night, and I started getting weird phone calls. That's when I realized they were watching me." Detective Miller continued. "Renee gathered enough evidence to prove that those men were connected to a larger trafficking operation, illegal organ sales. When they realized she'd gone to the police, they followed her home from work. She tried to make it to the station last night, but they caught up to her. She ran to your apartment for help because your door was the only one with the light still on." I sat there speechless, staring at Renee. "You ran to me because I was awake?" She smiled faintly. "It was pure instinct. I didn't even know if you'd be home, but I had to try. I'm just glad you listened when I said not to open for anyone." The detective added, "Your 911 call and quick thinking helped us catch one of them. His arrest led us to their hideout this morning. We found medical equipment, fake police badges, and records of people they targeted. You both helped stop something much bigger than you realize." The room went quiet. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning. The idea that something so dark had been happening right next to my quiet apartment. Life made me feel both sick and grateful. Renee's voice broke the silence. "You know, I kept telling myself not to involve anyone else because I didn't want anyone to get hurt. But last night, if I hadn't run to you, I don't think I'd still be here." Tears filled my eyes again. "I'm just glad you made it." After giving my statement and signing a few papers, I walked outside into the cold morning air. The sky was gray, and traffic moved slowly through puddles. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air in my lungs. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe freely. Before I got into my car, Renee caught up to me. She looked tired, but stronger somehow. "They're moving me to a safe house for now," she said, "but I wanted to see you before I left." I nodded. "Will they be able to find everyone involved?" "The detective said they're working on it," she said quietly. "It might take time, but it's over for now." We stood there for a moment, the sound of rain softly pattering against the pavement. "I'll never forget what happened," I said. "Every sound in that hallway, every word you said, it's burned into my mind." Renee smiled gently. "Then let's make sure it means something. Maybe we can both learn from it. Trust your instincts, even when they don't make sense." She pulled me into another hug, and this time it felt final, like we both understood that life wouldn't ever go back to what it was before. She turned to leave, and I watched her walk toward a police car, the door opening and closing with a heavy thud that echoed through the damp morning. On the drive home, I replayed everything again and again. The knock, her warning, the fake officers, the silence in the hallway. It all felt like a nightmare I had somehow survived. When I finally parked outside my apartment building, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the window of my own unit. It looked ordinary, peaceful, like nothing had ever happened there. But I knew better now. The world could change in a single night. Safety wasn't about strong locks or quiet neighborhoods. It was about awareness, courage, and the split-second decision to listen when something deep inside you whispers that something is wrong. As I walked inside, the floorboards creaked under my feet, but this time, the sound didn't scare me. It reminded me that I was alive, that I had listened, and that sometimes survival begins not with strength, but with the courage to trust your fear. The days that followed felt unreal, as if my mind was still trying to catch up with everything that had happened. The police kept in touch for several days after the arrest, updating me on the investigation. They confirmed that the group Renee had reported was part of a larger criminal ring operating in multiple states. Their method was simple but terrifying. They impersonated law enforcement or medical staff to get into people's homes. The man who had been caught outside my building confessed that they had planned to use me as leverage to get to Renee. Every time I heard that, my stomach twisted. I kept thinking about how close I had come to opening the door that night. One small decision had made all the difference between life and something much darker. For the first week, I couldn't sleep through the night. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. I found myself checking the locks over and over again, just to make sure they were secure. My mom called constantly after hearing what had happened, begging me to move back home for a while. But something inside me wanted to stay, to prove to myself that I wouldn't let fear control me. I had survived, and now I wanted to live like I wasn't constantly waiting for the next knock on the door. Renee and I stayed in touch through calls and messages. She had been moved to a safe house temporarily until the police finished the case. Every time we spoke, she sounded stronger. She told me she was meeting with detectives and helping them identify other people involved. There was a steadiness in her voice now, like someone who had faced the worst kind of danger and refused to be broken by it. Hearing her speak gave me courage. If she could keep fighting after everything she'd been through, then so could I. About 2 weeks after the incident, the police returned to my apartment complex to finish collecting evidence. They replaced my damaged lock and installed a better security system. Officer Grant stopped by during the process and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Renee. It said, "You listened when no one else would. That's what saved us both. Never doubt your instincts again." The message was simple, but it hit me harder than I expected. For the first time since that night, I felt a sense of peace slowly settle in. That evening, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea, the rain softly tapping against the windows again, and I thought about how much had changed. Before that night, I lived my life quietly, keeping to myself, believing that minding my own business was the safest way to live. But that was an illusion. Safety isn't just silence or distance. It's awareness. It's paying attention to the world around you, to the people who cross your path, and to that uneasy feeling that tells you something isn't right. I decided to make small changes in my life after that. I joined a community safety group that met once a week to share tips and talk about neighborhood concerns. It felt strange at first, opening up about what had happened, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. Sharing my story helped others open up about their own fears and experiences. It reminded me that what I went through could actually help protect someone else. The fear that once kept me silent was slowly turning into something powerful: awareness, strength, and connection. Renee called me again about a month later. Her voice was calm, lighter somehow. "They caught the rest of them," she said. "It's over, Nora." I didn't realize how much weight I had been carrying until that moment. I felt tears sting my eyes as I said, "I'm so glad you're safe." She laughed softly. "We're both safe, and I'm not running anymore." After we hung up, I sat by the window, watching the sun break through the clouds. The world outside looked normal again, almost peaceful, but I knew it wasn't the same peace I had before. It was a peace that came from surviving something real, something that tested every ounce of courage I had. I finally understood that strength isn't loud. It's quiet and steady, like the moment you decide to trust yourself, even when you're terrified. A few weeks later, Renee stopped by the apartment to see me before moving to a new city. When I opened the door, it struck me how different we both looked. Tired but alive, cautious but brave. We sat together for hours, drinking coffee and talking about everything except what happened. We laughed, shared stories about normal life, and promised to stay in touch. When she finally left, she hugged me tightly and said, "You were my lifeline that night." After she drove away, I stood at my window for a long time, watching the road disappear into the distance. I thought about how two strangers had turned into survivors because of one moment of trust, one warning, and one decision to listen. Life doesn't always give second chances, but when it does, it changes everything about the way you see the world. That night, I finally slept without fear. The rain outside didn't sound like danger anymore. It sounded like a reminder that even in the darkest, most uncertain moments, courage can begin quietly in the space between fear and instinct. And sometimes, listening to that instinct is what keeps you alive. If you've ever felt that something wasn't right, never ignore it. Trust your gut, stay alert, and remember that awareness can save your life. And if you were moved by my story, subscribe to my channel and comment below where you're watching from. Because by sharing these stories, we remind each other that courage isn't rare. It's in all of us, waiting for the moment we need it most.